It had been 14 years since the accident. A sudden stroke had sent Victor tumbling down the basement stairs, shattering his hip and tethering him permanently to a wheelchair. Though time had passed, the physical limitations remained a constant reminder of just how drastically life had changed. "Dad, do you want a blanket?" Natalie called from the kitchen, already clutching one from the hallway closet before he could answer. At 19, Natalie was the only child still living at home in their aging house on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. She had taken on the role of caregiver with a quiet strength and maturity far beyond her years. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Victor replied, his voice rough with the kind of weariness that had long since settled into his bones. "What time did Caleb say he'd be here?" Jonah, Victor's second eldest son, now 25, glanced at his phone. "He said around 6. Should be here any minute." Jonah shared his father's build-broad shoulders, cleft chin, that same steady gas, but his temperament was calmer, more measured. He worked as an accountant at a downtown firm, having paid his way through college with scholarships and late-night jobs after their mother, Helena, disappeared without a trace on a foggy autumn morning 14 years ago. Saturday, the 17th of October, a date forever etched into their memories. That morning, Helena had stepped out of their former seaside home in Oak Haven to buy groceries. She never returned. The salty air of the coast haunts, a soothing balm, had carried a sinister chill ever since. "Just running to Henderson's Market, love," she'd said, pressing a kiss to Jonah's forehead. He was 16 then, her eldest. Her lavender and sea spray scent lingered. "Look after your dad and the little ones. I'll be right back." She carried her worn leather handbag, the one that always held the cameo brooch Victor had given her on their first anniversary, a delicate ivory face carved into it like a serene goddess. But "right back" became a bottomless void. As dusk painted the Oak Haven sky in strokes of violet and blood orange, unease coiled tight in Jonah's gut. Henderson's confirmed she had stopped by. Milk, bread, a small bar of chocolate for the kids. She'd left mid-morning, Mr. Henderson recalled, distracted, her eyes fixed on something far beyond the horizon. At first, Oak Haven's police, led by weary, seen-it-all Sergeant Davy Shadd, offered simple reassurances. She probably needed space. Caring for Victor can't be easy for any woman. But Helena wasn't just any woman. She was the bedrock of their lives. When the hours turned into days, and her modest blue sedan was still missing, even Davies's tone turned grim. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of frantic searches, hushed speculation, and the deafening silence of her absence. Victor, still in the hospital, shattered upon hearing the news. His grief became a fresh wound that slowed his recovery even further. Whispers slithered through Oak Haven. Had Helena run away from the burden of a disabled husband and mounting medical debt? Had she found someone else and vanished into a new life? Jonah rejected it all, fierce loyalty burning in his chest. Others feared tragedie off a cliff, lost to the sea. The investigation eventually dissolved. Leads vanished like foam on the surf. Helena Beaumont became folklore, her file tucked away and forgotten. Victor returned home, a ghost of the man he once was. The financial burden was suffocating. Jonah sacrificed his dreams of an elite university to work at the Oak Haven shipyards. Claire, then only 9, poured herself into books and later ran a quiet bookstore in town. Natalie, just 5 at the time, grew up fast and took up the role of caretaker for her father. Ben, an infant when Helena disappeared, only knew his mother through photos and the memories his older siblings carefully curated, some tender, some painful. "Ben, can you turn the volume down a little?" Claire called from the dining room as she set the table. Now 23, she was graceful but grounded, her long black hair tied in a practical ponytail as she moved between the kitchen and the table with quiet efficiency. Ben, now 15, lounged on the couch with the remote in hand. He reluctantly muted the sports highlights he was watching, eyes drifting toward the window, toward nothing. To him, Helena was more myth than memory. 14 years. 14 years of birthdays without her, of milestones missed, of an open wound that never healed. The cameo brooch became Jonah's quiet obsession. He imagined her holding it in her final moments of freedom or having it ripped from her hand. It was the one piece of her he could almost still feel. He never stopped searching. In his own quiet, methodical way, he pored over public records, missing persons forums, any thread that might pull the curtain back even a little. The world may have forgotten Helena Beaumont, but her eldest son had not. He remained a sentinel, staring out at the cold, empty horizon, waiting for a sign that never came. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation usually filled the Beaumont dining room on Sunday evenings. It was a ritual painstakingly maintained, a fragile bulwark against the encroaching shadows of the past. Arthur, his silver hair a stark contrast to his pallid complexion, presided from his wheelchair at the head of the table, his gaze often distant, lost in memories only he could access. Ethan, now 30, his face etched with a quiet intensity that made him seem older, was carving the roast chicken. His hands, calloused from years of carpentry, moved with a practiced efficiency. He'd taken on the role of patriarch by default, a responsibility he bore with a stoic, almost grim determination. Olivia, 28, a successful financial analyst in the nearby city of Westport, meticulously arranged a salad. Her pragmatism, a shield honed over years of hardship, often grated against Ethan's unwavering, almost obsessive, refusal to accept their mother's abandonment. "The chicken smells wonderful, Ethan," she remarked, her tone carefully neutral, avoiding the unspoken tension that always simmered beneath the surface whenever their mother's absence felt particularly acute. Isabel, 26, now a librarian with a penchant for forgotten histories, set out the water glasses, her movements precise and deliberate. She rarely spoke of their mother, her grief a private, well-guarded sanctuary. Lily, 19, her mother's gentle nature reflected in her kind eyes, was helping Arthur with his napkin. She was his primary caregiver, her youth a willing sacrifice to his needs. Sam, 15, all lanky limbs and restless energy, was hunched over his phone, reluctantly pausing his game at Isabel's quiet request. The doorbell, an unexpected intrusion, shattered the fragile peace. Lily opened it to reveal Detective Marcus Valerius. Valerius was a new face in Oakhaven, transferred from Westport PD's cold case unit a year prior. He was younger than Sergeant Davies had been, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. His presence could only mean one thing concerning the Beaumonts. An unnerving silence descended, the aroma of the roast suddenly cloying. Arthur turned his wheelchair, his frail hands gripping the armrests, his gaze filled with a sudden, fearful apprehension. "Ethan," Valerius began, his voice calm but resonant, his gaze sweeping over the assembled family. "I apologize for the intrusion, but there's been a development, a significant one." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He set down the carving knife, his hand surprisingly steady. "What is it, Detective?" "We've found your mother's car," Valerius stated, the words dropping into the stillness like stones into a deep well. A collective gasp. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, her carefully constructed composure cracking. Isabel swayed, her knuckles white as she gripped the back of a chair. Lily's eyes welled, and she moved closer to her father. Sam stared, his youthful face a mask of confusion and dawning shock. "Where?" Ethan's voice was a raw whisper, the sound scraped from his throat. "Submerged in Serpent's Coil Lake. It's about 30 miles north, quite remote. A group of specialist cave divers located it yesterday during a survey." Valerius paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "It's been down there a long time, Ethan. The vehicle, it was empty." "Empty." The word echoed, a hollow pronouncement. Not the closure of a body, but not the definitive proof of abandonment either. It was a new, agonizing shade of uncertainty. "However," Valerius continued, his gaze locking with Ethan's, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, "there were items recovered from within the vehicle. We'll need you, perhaps the whole family, to come to the Oakhaven station tomorrow, and then, possibly, to the recovery site." He hesitated. "There are aspects of this discovery that are perplexing." The Sunday dinner, once a symbol of their enduring, if fractured unity, lay forgotten. The 14 years of silence, of unanswered questions and carefully suppressed grief, had been violently ripped open by a discovery from the cold, dark waters. Ethan met Detective Valerius's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This wasn't an ending, nor was it a simple beginning. It was an unearthing, and what lay beneath the silt and sorrow was yet to be seen. For Ethan, one name, a phantom he'd chased in the lonely hours of his private investigation, echoed in his mind: Serafina Rossi. A name linked to a shell corporation with tenuous, almost invisible ties to Julian Vance, a man whose legitimate businesses were rumored to be mere fronts for far darker enterprises. Ethan had never dared voice this suspicion, fearing it would sound like the ravings of a grief-stricken son. But now, with Clara's car dragged from the depths, the phantom seemed to stir, its spectral fingers reaching towards the light. The journey to Serpent's Coil Lake the following morning was a study in subdued dread. Ethan piloted the family's aging SUV, its engine a low groan against the oppressive silence within. Arthur sat beside him, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape, his thoughts an impenetrable fortress. In the back, Olivia stared out the window, her expression unreadable, while Isabel clutched a worn book of poetry as if it were a lifeline. Lily and Sam were unnaturally quiet, the gravity of the situation settling upon them like a physical weight. Detective Valerius followed in his department vehicle, a discreet shadow in their wake. Serpent's Coil Lake was a brooding expanse of water, its surface dark and still, mirroring the leaden sky. Dense, ancient pines pressed in on all sides, their branches like skeletal fingers, casting long, mournful shadows. A mobile command unit had been established, and the glint of official vehicles was stark against the wilderness. Yellow police tape cordoned off a section of the muddy bank where a heavy-duty recovery vehicle stood, its winch cable still glistening. And there, dragged onto the shore, like some prehistoric beast hauled from the primordial ooze, was a mangled, mud-encrusted blue sedan, Clara's car. A strangled gasp escaped Arthur's lips. Lily tightened her grip on his arm, her own face ashen. Olivia's composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Isabel closed her eyes, her lips moving in a silent prayer, or perhaps a curse. Sam simply stared, his youthful bravado stripped away, leaving him looking small and vulnerable. Ethan felt a profound, chilling detachment, as if he were observing this scene through a distorted lens. This rusted, violated shell was a direct conduit to that terrible Saturday, a tangible link to the mother he remembered and the mystery that had consumed him. Detective Valerius led them towards a series of evidence tables set up under a portable awning. "We completed the initial extraction at first light," he explained, his voice low and steady, a professional anchor in their emotional maelstrom. The vehicle was deliberately sunk. The gear shift was in neutral, windows partially open to facilitate flooding. It was well concealed in a deep fissure on the lakebed. "Was there any sign of her?" Arthur managed, his voice a fragile whisper. "No, Mr. Beaumont. As I informed you, the vehicle was devoid of human remains." Valerius gestured towards the evidence bags. However, several items were recovered. The first bag contained a sodden, misshapen leather handbag. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the worn strap, the faint indentation where the cameo brooch always rested. Inside, miraculously preserved within a plastic Ziploc bag, likely by Clara herself for some unknown reason, was her driver's license. Her smiling face, younger, vibrant, mocked them from behind the plastic. A faded receipt from Henderson's Market, dated the 17th of October, lay beside it. "And these?" Valerius continued, his voice taking on a graver note as he indicated another set of bags. One held a pair of expensive, Italian-made men's driving gloves. Another contained a heavy gold signet ring, intricately engraved with the initials MK. A third held a tarnished silver cigar cutter. These items were found on the passenger side, some under the seat, the ring on the floor mat. Olivia let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "So, that's it then. The whispers were true. She wasn't alone. She ran out on us, with him." The accusation, sharp and laced with years of pain, hung in the air. "We mustn't jump to conclusions, Olivia," Ethan interjected, his voice tight, though a cold dread was seeping into his own heart. The evidence was undeniably suggestive. "The forensic team is conducting a thorough examination," Valerius stated, his gaze carefully neutral. "But preliminary assessment indicates no signs of a struggle within the vehicle itself. No blood evidence, no torn fabric. The current working hypothesis, based on these findings, is that Mrs. Beaumont may have orchestrated her disappearance, possibly with an associate, and this scene was staged to imply an accident or abduction." "No," Ethan said, the word a raw sound torn from his soul. My mother would never do that. Not to Dad, not in his condition, not to us. He felt the familiar burn of defiance, the stubborn refusal to accept the narrative being woven before him. Isabel was weeping now, quiet, shoulder-shaking sobs. Lily was trying to soothe Arthur, whose face had crumpled, the faint hope that had flickered in his eyes now extinguished, replaced by an agonizing look of betrayal. Sam looked utterly bewildered, adrift in a sea of adult anguish. "Ethan, the evidence is compelling," Valerius said, his tone not unsympathetic. 14 years of silence, a deliberately sunk vehicle containing items belonging to an unidentified male companion. A sudden, sharp thought pierced through Ethan's turmoil. "The cameo brooch?" he demanded, his voice urgent. "Her brooch. Was it in the handbag?" "It was her most treasured possession." Valerius frowned, consulting the detailed inventory list compiled by the forensics team. He scanned the pages. "No brooch listed, Ethan. Wallet, license, receipt, some cosmetics. Loose change, but no jewelry of that description." This anomaly snagged in Ethan's mind, a discordant note in the symphony of despair. If Clara had planned this, if she had left willingly, why abandon something so deeply cherished, so intrinsically part of her, unless it wasn't abandoned, unless it was taken, or, perhaps, left elsewhere as a deliberate sign? But to whom? And signifying what? "All recovered items will be meticulously analyzed," Valerius assured them. "We will endeavor to trace the ownership of the gloves, the ring, the cutter. This is a complex situation, Mr. Beaumont," he said, addressing Ethan directly. "For years, your family has endured the torment of not knowing. This discovery, while painful, offers a form of resolution, a direction, even if it's not the one you wished for." Resolution? Ethan felt anything but. This deluge of evidence felt more like a carefully constructed misdirection. The initials M.K. on the ring. They sparked a faint, troubling flicker of recognition, a connection he couldn't quite grasp, and the persistent, shadowy name of Julian Vance and his own secret discovery of Serafina Rossi still echoed in the recesses of his mind. As they turned to leave, the grotesque tableau of the dredged car seared itself into Ethan's memory. His siblings, even his father, seemed to be succumbing to the narrative presented by Valerius and the cold, hard facts. A mother, broken by circumstance, fleeing her life. But Ethan felt a steely resolve hardening within him, a cold fire of conviction. The absence of the cameo brooch, the unsettling familiarity of M.K., the phantom of Serafina Rossi, these were not loose ends, they were threads. And he would pull on them until the entire rotten tapestry unraveled. The relics from that lost morning had spoken, but Ethan was utterly convinced they were lying. The days following the grim pilgrimage to Serpent's Coil Lake settled into a new, agonizing rhythm for the Beaumont family. The Oakhaven rumor mill, predictably, churned with renewed vigor, the discovery of the men's items in Clara's car adding fuel to the long smoldering embers of speculation. For Olivia, the evidence was a bitter pill, yet it offered a perverse kind of closure. "At least, we know she chose to leave," she'd stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, a defense mechanism against further pain. It wasn't some random act of violence. Isabel retreated further into the quiet sanctuary of her books, the fictional sorrows of others, a welcome distraction from the raw, gaping wound in her own family. Lily, ever compassionate, focused her energies on Arthur, shielding him as best she could from the renewed onslaught of grief and the cruel whispers of the town. Sam, caught between youthful incomprehension and the palpable anguish of his older siblings, oscillated between sullen silence and uncharacteristic outbursts of frustration. Arthur himself was a study in shattered dignity. The perceived betrayal by Clara, the woman he had loved and trusted implicitly, seemed to have inflicted a wound deeper than his physical ailments. He rarely spoke her name now, the sound of it a fresh abrasion on his soul. Ethan, however, was a man possessed. The official narrative, Clara orchestrating her own disappearance with an unknown male accomplice, felt like a shoddy theatrical production, the props all wrong, the script full of gaping holes. The missing cameo brooch gnawed at him. The initials M.K. on the signet ring haunted his waking hours. He became a regular, unwelcome fixture at the Oakhaven police station. His polite but persistent requests for access to all case files, forensic photographs, and inventory lists wearing down Detective Valerius's professional reserve. Finally, Valerius, perhaps sensing Ethan's unyielding determination, or simply hoping to appease him into silence, relented. He provided Ethan with password-protected digital access to the publicly disclosable portions of the ongoing investigation. "There's nothing in these files, Ethan, that contradicts our current assessment," Valerius had cautioned, his tone a mixture of sympathy and weariness. "Perhaps reviewing them will provide you with the closure you seek." Closure. The word was a mockery. As Ethan sat late into the night in the cluttered solitude of his small workshop, the scent of cedarwood and varnish failing to soothe his agitated spirit, the glow of his laptop cast stark shadows on his drawn face. He meticulously dissected every document, scrutinized every grainy photograph of the car's interior, cross-referenced every item on the inventory lists. The men's items were a focal point of the official report, their presence heavily underscoring the voluntary departure theory. The Italian driving gloves, the expensive cigar cutter, the gold signet ring with MK, they painted a picture of a sophisticated, wealthy companion. Then, buried deep within a subfolder cryptically labeled MISC, Recovered, Paper, Fragments, GV, Comp, he found it. A series of scanned images, low-resolution photocopies of water-damaged documents that had been found fused together in the glove compartment, initially dismissed as illegible and irrelevant. Most were indeed little more than pulp, but one, painstakingly separated and enhanced by a forensic document examiner, was a fragment of a lease agreement. Much of it was obliterated, but key details, through some miracle of preservation or perhaps Clara's own foresight in sealing it within something waterproof, remained starkly, chillingly clear. The date was discernible, the 23rd of January, nearly 3.5 months after Clara's disappearance. The address listed was for a dilapidated commercial storage unit in Rustgate Industrial Zone, a notorious gray area on the blighted outskirts of Westport, known more for illicit chop shops and clandestine operations than legitimate enterprise. The tenant's name, typed neatly on the form, was Serafina Rossi. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Serafina Rossi. The name he had unearthed years ago during his own clandestine, grief-fueled deep dives into obscure public records and shell corporations. A name that had briefly, almost invisibly, been listed as a director for a defunct import-export company with shadowy, unconfirmed links to Julian Vance, a powerful, untouchable figure whose legitimate businesses were widely rumored to be mere facades for a sprawling criminal empire. But it was the signature scrawled at the bottom of the lease fragment, captured in the stark black and white of the scanned image, that made Ethan's heart cease to beat for a frozen moment. Faded, blurred by water damage, yet utterly, undeniably, heartbreakingly familiar. The elegant, cursive sweep of the C, the distinctive, slightly old-fashioned loop of the B, it was Clara Beaumont's signature. His mother, using a false name, had leased a derelict warehouse unit from a company with known connections to Julian Vance, months after she was supposed to have vanished with another man. This wasn't closure. This was an explosive revelation, a terrifying glimpse into a truth far darker than he could have ever imagined. His mind reeled. Why would Clara, if she had eloped to start a new life, be renting a squalid storage unit in a dangerous industrial zone under an alias? It defied all logic. Unless she hadn't eloped, unless she was a prisoner, unless Serafina Rossi was not a choice, but an imposition. The landlord's section of the lease listed the lessor as Vance Consolidated Holdings. A surge of adrenaline, potent and dangerous, coursed through Ethan. He couldn't go to Valerius with this, not yet. Not with a fragmented, water-damaged lease and a wild, unsubstantiated theory connecting his missing mother to a notorious crime lord. Valerius, for all his astuteness, would likely dismiss it as the desperate conjecture of a grieving son, a man grasping at straws. He had to see this place. He had to know. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. Rustgate Industrial Zone would be a ghost town. He grabbed his jacket, a heavy-duty flashlight, his mind a maelstrom of fear and a terrible, burgeoning hope. His mother's signature, a phantom limb reaching out from the past, was pulling him forward. It was a signature made under duress. He felt it with every fiber of his being. A signature that screamed a truth no one else had been willing to hear, a truth that might finally shatter the carefully constructed lies surrounding her disappearance. The drive to Rustgate Industrial Zone was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Ethan's ancient truck rattled over the poorly maintained roads, its headlights cutting feeble swathes through the oppressive darkness. Rustgate was even more desolate than its reputation suggested, a sprawling necropolis of decaying factories, boarded-up warehouses, and shadowy refuse-strewn alleyways, sporadically illuminated by the sickly orange glow of malfunctioning streetlights. He found the address from the lease fragment. Unit 12. C. Apex Secure Storage, a name that was a cruel irony given the building's dilapidated state. It was a long, low, windowless structure of corrugated iron, its paint peeling, its perimeter fence sagging and breached in multiple places. Parking a discreet distance away, Ethan approached on foot, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The main roll-up door to Unit 12C was padlocked, the metal rusted and dented. He circled the unit, his flashlight beam dancing nervously across the grimy walls. A smaller access door at the rear, half hidden by overgrown weeds and discarded tires, looked less secure. The lock was old, corroded. He tested it. It yielded with a sharp crack of splintering wood and a groan of tortured metal. He slipped inside, the air thick with the cloying stench of damp concrete, rat droppings, and something else, something metallic and vaguely chemical. The flashlight beam sliced through the inky blackness, revealing a space that was larger than he'd anticipated, crammed with dust-covered crates, old machinery shrouded in tarpaulins, and stacks of unidentifiable, decaying goods. It looked like a forgotten tomb, a dumping ground for the detritus of failed businesses and broken dreams. Then, in a far corner, partially obscured by a fallen stack of rotten pallets, he saw it. Scrawled hastily on the grimy concrete wall, in what looked like a piece of chalk or perhaps a shard of broken brick, were two sets of initials, CB, and directly beneath them, Mr. Clara Beaumont, and MK, the initials from the signet ring found in her car. His breath hitched. This was it. This was where the two narratives collided, the official police theory of an elopement and his own dark suspicions of something far more sinister. They had both been here. But why? He swept the flashlight beam around again, more slowly this time, his senses hyper-alert. And then he saw it, glinting faintly from beneath a pile of oil-stained rags tucked into a dark alcove. Something small, metallic, familiar. He knelt, his hand trembling as he reached for it, pushing aside the filthy rags. His fingers closed around cool carved ivory and tarnished silver. His mother's cameo brooch. It was caked in grime, the delicate silver setting bent, the clasp broken. But it was unmistakably hers. He fumbled it open. The tiny portrait of the serene goddess seemed to gaze up at him with an ancient, sorrowful wisdom. And on the reverse, where a small retaining clip should have been, he noticed a tiny, almost invisible scratch mark. Using his nail, he pried at it. A minuscule, tightly folded square of onion skin paper, no bigger than his thumbnail, fell into his palm. With fumbling, desperate fingers, he unfolded it. The paper was fragile, almost transparent, the ink faded but still legible in the harsh beam of his flashlight. 3 words, written in his mother's distinctive, elegant script: Leviathan, Vance, hostage. A tidal wave of emotions, terror, vindication, a profound, aching sorrow, crashed over Ethan. Leviathan, Vance, hostage. It was a cipher, a desperate message from the abyss. Julian Vance. His mother had been his hostage. The Leviathan, a ship, a place, a code name. He had to get this to Valerius. Now, this changed everything. As he scrambled to his feet, his mind reeling, a sudden noise from outside the unit froze him in place. A low cough, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Someone was out there. He doused his flashlight, plunging the warehouse back into Stygian blackness, his heart leaping into his throat. He pressed himself against a stack of crates, peering through a tiny gap. A shadowy figure moved past the breached rear door, pausing for a moment as if listening. Ethan couldn't make out any features, but the man's silhouette was tall, imposing. He carried himself with a quiet menace. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the figure moved on, disappearing into the labyrinthine darkness of Rustgate. Shaken, Ethan waited several agonizing minutes before daring to slip out of the unit, the cameo brooch and its cryptic message clutched tightly in his hand. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck, his gaze darting nervously into the shadows. the feeling of being watched by a cold serpent coiling around his spine. He drove, not towards Oakhaven but directly to Detective Valerius's home, the first pale streaks of dawn painting the grim Westport skyline. He knew he was on the verge of something monumental, something terrifying. His mother hadn't just vanished. She had been swallowed by the criminal underworld, by Julian Vance, a man whose name was synonymous with power and ruthlessness. And she had, with incredible courage, left behind a desperate breadcrumb trail, a cipher that only a son's unwavering love and determination could possibly decode. The shadow of Julian Vance's cartel had just become terrifyingly real. Detective Valerius, roused from a fitful sleep by Ethan's frantic pre-dawn arrival, listened with grim, focused intensity as Ethan laid out his discoveries. The squalid Rustgate warehouse, the conjoined initials CB and MK scrawled on the wall, and finally the cameo brooch with its chilling, three-word message, Leviathan, Vance, hostage. The sight of the tarnished brooch, a tangible piece of Clara Beaumont, seemed to dispel any lingering skepticism Valerius might have harbored. Julian Vance, Valerius breathed, the name of a venomous whisper in the quiet of his kitchen. We've suspected his involvement in high-level trafficking and enforced disappearances for years. But he's always been insulated, protected by layers of plausible deniability and brutal enforcers. Milo Costa, M.K., is his most trusted, most vicious lieutenant. If Costa's ring was in Clara's car, and their initials are together in that warehouse, he shook his head, a muscle twitching in his jaw. This is deep, Ethan. Deeper and darker than we imagined. The figure Ethan had seen outside the Rustgate unit added another layer of chilling urgency. Vance's people are watching, Valerius stated, his eyes hard. They might not know what you found, but they know someone's poking around. We need to move fast, and we need to move carefully. A discreet, high-priority investigation was immediately launched, drawing resources from both Oakhaven PD and Westport's organized crime unit. The Rustgate warehouse was placed under covert surveillance, but Valerius suspected it was merely a discarded shell, a place of past horrors, not current containment. The focus shifted to Julian Vance's known assets, his legitimate business fronts, and crucially, Milo Costa's movements. The term Leviathan became the central obsession. Was it a code name for an operation? A specific location? A vessel? Maritime databases were scoured, informants squeezed, every whisper and rumor related to Vance's clandestine activities meticulously analyzed. Days bled into a week of agonizing tension. Ethan, officially a civilian consultant on the case, due to his intimate knowledge, felt like a caged animal. He provided Valerius with every scrap of his own years-long clandestine research into Vance's network, including the Serafina Rossi alias he'd previously hesitated to mention, fearing it was too outlandish. Valerius, however, seized on it. If Clara was forced to operate under an alias for Vance, it implies a level of long-term coercion, of exploitation. She wasn't just a random victim. The Beaumont family was in a state of suspended animation, caught between terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Arthur clung to Ethan's updates, his frail body trembling with a mixture of fear for Clara and a father's fierce pride in his son. Olivia's pragmatism was slowly, painfully, giving way to the horrifying reality that her mother hadn't abandoned them, but had been stolen. Isabel found herself unable to focus on her historical texts, the present unfolding with a drama that eclipsed any anachronistic tale. Lily and Sam looked to Ethan with a new, almost reverent awe. Then came the breakthrough. An old, low-level informant from the Westport docks, a man with a long memory and even longer grievances against Vance's organization, contacted Valerius. He spoke of a secluded, heavily fortified cove north of Oakhaven, known in hushed whispers among the criminal underworld as Blackwood Cove. It had been one of Vance's earliest operational hubs, used for smuggling and as a discreet holding facility. The informant believed Vance had recently reactivated it, and Milo Costa had been sighted there multiple times in recent weeks. And the name whispered in connection with Vance's most sensitive, untraceable shipments out of Blackwood Cove? The Leviathan. It's a ghost ship, Valerius explained to Ethan, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Unregistered, frequently repainted and renamed, crewed by mercenaries. Vance uses it for his most precious or problematic cargo. If Clara was deemed too great a risk or too valuable an asset to eliminate, the Leviathan via Blackwood Cove would be his go-to for making her disappear permanently. A covert reconnaissance mission confirmed activity at Blackwood Cove. Armed guards, sophisticated surveillance. It was a hornet's nest. A high-risk tactical raid was planned for the dead of night. Ethan, his heart a cold stone of dread in his chest, pleaded to be part of it, or at least nearby. Valerius, after a fierce internal debate, agreed to allow him at the secure perimeter command post, a concession to Ethan's unwavering involvement. Under the cloak of a starless new moon night, the assault began. Muffled sounds of the tactical team's approach, the crackle of encrypted radio communications, then the sudden chaotic eruption of the breach. Shouts, the thud of stun grenades, sporadic bursts of contained gunfire. Ethan, watching from a mile distant through high-powered thermal imaging binoculars alongside Valerius, felt his blood run cold. After an eternity that lasted perhaps 20 minutes, the radio crackled. Target secured. Multiple hostiles neutralized or in custody. Costa is down, non-fatally, and apprehended. A pause then. Detective, the primary holding facility is clear. No sign of Clara Beaumont. But we found evidence she was here. Recently. Valerius swore under his breath, then relayed the grim news to Ethan, whose hope plummeted like a stone. But, the voice on the radio continued, in Costa's private office within the main compound, we found something. Logbooks, heavily coded, and what appears to be a makeshift workstation, recently cleared. Looks like someone with significant financial acumen was operating from here. Serafina Rossi, Ethan breathed. My mother. She was good with numbers, meticulous. The logs mention SR handling sensitive accounts. Valerius confirmed, listening intently to his radio. It seems Vance wasn't just holding her, he was exploiting her skills. She was valuable. He paused, his expression shifting. One of the captured guards, a younger one, terrified. He's talking. He says SR became problematic, asked too many questions, knew too much. He overheard Costa saying Vance ordered her transferred to the Leviathan for final processing just 2 days ago. Said the police were getting too close after the Rustgate activity. Final processing. The words were a death knell. But then Valerius held up a hand, listening to a further transmission. Wait. The guard also said SR. Left something behind in her quarters. A small, recently carved wooden figurine of a seabird, and etched into its base, almost invisibly, were 2 letters, LV, Leviathan, Vance, or perhaps Leviathan Voyage. She was alive. She was on that ship, and she was still fighting, still leaving them clues. The smuggler's den had been a temporary cage, but the Leviathan was her current prison, sailing towards an unknown, terrifying fate. The aftermath of the Blackwood Cove raid was a chaotic whirlwind of arrests, evidence collection, and intense interrogations. Milo Costa, Julian Vance's brutal right hand, wounded but alive, was a granite wall of defiance, his contempt for law enforcement radiating from him like a palpable heat. He offered nothing but sneers and threats, secure in the knowledge that Vance's reach was long, his vengeance legendary. Vance himself had vanished, a ghost in the machine, his network now alerted and scrambling. The small, intricately carved wooden seabird became Ethan's focus, a fragile beacon in the overwhelming darkness. LV, Leviathan Voyage, or perhaps Leviathan, Vance holding. His mother was on that ship. He knew it with a certainty that transcended logic. She was still sending messages, her spirit unbroken. Detective Valerius, though sharing Ethan's conviction, was grimly pragmatic. The Leviathan is a phantom, Ethan, untraceable by conventional means. Vance has undoubtedly already changed its call signs, its transponder codes. Without Costa or Vance himself talking, finding it in the vastness of the ocean, he left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. The lower-level guards captured at Blackwood Cove were a mixed bag. Most were hired muscle, ignorant of the broader strokes of Vance's operations. But one, an older, weary-looking man named Gregor, the same one who had mentioned SR's transfer and the carved bird, seemed different. His eyes, sunken and haunted, held a flicker of something other than fear or defiance, perhaps a lifetime of regret. He had been one of Vance's long-serving retainers, a silent, peripheral figure who had witnessed years of the cartel's dark dealings. Ethan, present at the Westport precinct during a tense strategy meeting with Valerius and the organized crime unit, felt an inexplicable urge to speak to Gregor. "Let me talk to him, Valerius," he pleaded. "Alone, or with you. He mentioned my mother. He saw the bird. He knows more than he's letting on." He might not respond to standard interrogation, but a son desperate to find his mother. Valerius, initially resistant, saw the raw, unyielding determination in Ethan's eyes, the same tenacity that had led them this far. He knew conventional methods were failing with Costa. After a tense private consultation with the lead prosecutor, a carefully monitored interaction was sanctioned. Gregor was brought into a small, stark interview room. He looked smaller, older, without the bravado of his fellow captives. He regarded Ethan with a tired, almost resigned gaze. "Mr. Gregor," Ethan began, his voice surprisingly steady, the carved seabird resting on the table between them. "My name is Ethan Beaumont. The woman you knew as S.R. Serafina Rossi, she was my mother, Clara Beaumont." A flicker of surprise, then a deep, sorrowful understanding, crossed Gregor's weathered face. He looked at the seabird, his rough fingers tracing its delicate lines. "She carved this," Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The initials L.V. She was telling us she's on the Leviathan, that Vance has her." Gregor sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. Clara, Serafina, she had a spirit. Vance thought he could break her, use her mind for his filthy accounts. She fought him, in her own ways. Quiet ways, leaving little signs, like this bird. He picked it up, his touch surprisingly gentle. She knew the risks, knew what Vance did to those who became liabilities. "Where is the Leviathan, Gregor?" Ethan's voice was urgent, pleading. "Vance is gone. Costa won't talk. You're the only one who might know something, anything, to help us find her before it's too late." Gregor looked from Ethan to Valerius, who stood silently observing. "Costa," Gregor said, his voice a low rasp. "He's the key. Not through threats, not through pain. He won't break that way. But his ego, his arrogance," he paused, a cunning light appearing in his tired eyes. "Costa managed all of Vance's secure communications, his encrypted networks. He prided himself on their sophistication. He used a proprietary application, custom-built. It had features, real-time asset tracking, including the Leviathan, secure comms, even limited access to onboard surveillance feeds for high-value assets." Valerius leaned forward, his interest piqued. "And you think you can give us access to this application, Gregor? Or help us get Costa too?" Gregor gave a grim smile. "Costa is a creature of immense vanity and predictable habits. His passwords, his security protocols. They always incorporate elements from his past, his old street crew, significant dates, names. He thinks they're clever, untraceable. I've observed him over the years. I might be able to suggest certain avenues of inquiry for your tech people. Combinations he favored." He then looked directly at Ethan. "But if you access it, if they realize the system is compromised, they'll know. The Leviathan will vanish into deeper waters, or worse." "Our cybercrimes unit is exceptional," Valerius interjected, his voice taut with a new, focused energy. "If there's a way in, they'll find it. And they can mask their entry." He turned to Gregor. "Will you give us those avenues of inquiry?" Gregor nodded slowly, his gaze settling on the small wooden seabird in his hand. Clara Beaumont didn't deserve her fate. She was a good woman, caught in a devil's bargain to save her family. He looked at Ethan, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. "She spoke of you often, her eldest, the one who would never stop searching." A fragile, almost unbearable hope surged through Ethan. Gregor, the reluctant keeper of secrets, was offering them a key, a desperate gamble. Milo Costa's arrogance, his digital fortress, might paradoxically become the very instrument of his downfall and Clara's salvation. The Leviathan was still a ghost, but now they had a map to its hunting grounds. The air in the Westport PD's cybercrimes unit crackled with a focused, almost palpable intensity. Anya Sharma, the unit's lead forensic analyst, a woman whose youthful appearance belied a razor-sharp intellect and formidable technical skills, sat hunched over a bank of monitors. Gregor's insights into Milo Costa's password habits, old crew names, anniversaries of significant scores, even his mother's maiden name, combined with his favorite vintage car, had provided a surprisingly effective Rosetta Stone. Ethan, Detective Valerius, and Arthur Beaumont, brought in by a determined Lily, who insisted her father had a right to witness this, watched from the periphery, their collective breath held. Hours had passed in a tense, caffeine-fueled marathon of algorithms and educated guesses. "Costa's a nostalgic brute," Anya muttered, her fingers flying across a specialized keyboard. "His digital security is layered, but the core passphrases are sentimental, in a sociopathic kind of way." She executed a final string of commands. A complex interface, stark and utilitarian, bloomed across the main screen. "I'm in," she announced, a triumphant grin briefly illuminating her tired face. "Mirrored session established. Costa's system won't register our intrusion. We have access to Vance's secure network." A wave of relief, so potent it was almost dizzying, washed over the onlookers. "The asset tracker," Valerius urged, his voice tight. "Gregor mentioned it. Codename for the Leviathan?" Anya navigated the cryptic menus. Gregor suggested Vance use shifting codenames, but Costa liked consistency for his high-priority assets. He mentioned Project Abyss in his notes for top-tier secure transport. She clicked on the corresponding entry. A global map materialized on the screen, dominated by the vast expanse of the Atlantic. A single, malevolent red icon pulsed steadily, far out in international waters, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. "There she is," Anya breathed. "Project Abyss, the Leviathan, approximately 200 nautical miles east, southeast of the Azores. Current heading, due south. Speed, 12 knots. Arthur let out a choked sob, his frail hand gripping Ethan's arm with surprising strength. Lily rushed to his side, her own eyes brimming. This was it, the ghost ship, finally given form and location. "Onboard surveillance feeds?" Valerius pressed, his professional composure barely masking the raw excitement in his voice. "Gregor said Costa could access limited visuals." "Attempting to establish secure handshake now," Anya replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Bandwidth is low, heavily encrypted, but Costa's credentials are still valid. Yes, patching through rudimentary feeds." The main monitor fractured into a mosaic of grainy black and white images. The thrumming heart of an engine room, shadowy cargo holds piled high with indeterminate crates, starkly lit corridors, a utilitarian mess hall. Ethan scanned each image desperately, his hope warring with a sickening dread. What if Clara was confined to a part of the ship without surveillance? "Wait!" Ethan exclaimed, his voice hoarse, pointing to a small, flickering feed in the upper quadrant. "That one. The lighting is different. Can you enhance it?" The selected feed expanded, filling the screen. It depicted a cramped, windowless cabin, converted into a makeshift office. A single figure was seated at a cluttered desk, hunched over a ledger or a laptop, their back partially to the camera. The figure's movements were slow, methodical, imbued with an air of profound weariness. "Zoom in, Anya," Ethan whispered, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Focus on the subject." The image pixelated, then slowly resolved. The figure shifted, turning slightly to rub the back of their neck, revealing a partial profile. Hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back tightly from a face that was gaunt, etched with lines of unimaginable suffering, yet possessed of an undeniable, resilient strength. A collective gasp, sharp and painful, filled the room. Though 14 years of hell had stolen her youth and vibrancy, there was no mistaking the proud set of her jaw, the curve of her high cheekbone, the almost defiant way she held her shoulders, even in captivity. "Clara," Arthur wept, his voice a shattered whisper, reaching a trembling, age-spotted hand towards the screen as if to bridge the impossible distance. "My beautiful Clara." Ethan felt the world tilt, the air rushing from his lungs. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down his face. It was her, his mother. Not a ghost, not a memory, but a living, breathing woman, a prisoner on a criminal's ship, adrift in the vast, uncaring ocean. Olivia and Isabel, who had arrived with Sam after Lily's urgent call, clung to each other, their carefully constructed defenses crumbling into raw, unrestrained sobs. Sam stared, his young face a canvas of disbelief, wonder, and a dawning, fierce pride. This was his mother, the mythical figure from his childhood, made real in the most terrifying, extraordinary way. Visual confirmation. Valerius barked into his encrypted satellite phone, his voice ringing with triumph and urgency. Target vessel Leviathan, operating as Project Abyss, current coordinates locked. Confirmed hostage, Clara Beaumont, on board. Scramble International Maritime Rescue. Full intercept protocol. This is a priority 1 recovery, people. She is alive. As Valerius began the complex, high-stakes coordination with international authorities, the Beaumont family remained transfixed, their gazes tethered to the flickering image of Clara. Oblivious to the storm of activity she had unleashed, she continued her forced labor, a testament to the indomitable strength of the human spirit. Ethan watched her, a maelstrom of emotions. Love, rage, an overwhelming relief, surging through him. They had found her. Against all odds, against the crushing weight of 14 lost years, they had found her. Suddenly, Anya's voice cut through the charged atmosphere, sharp with alarm. "Detective, I'm detecting new encrypted data bursts from the Leviathan. They're small but frequent. It's not standard ship-to-shore. It looks like they're receiving instructions from an unknown, land-based source." Her eyes widened. New course parameters just uploaded to the Leviathan's navigation system. Flagged critical override by Costa's master credentials. Someone else has them. Vance. She pointed to the map on the screen. They're altering course, veering sharply southwest, towards the doldrums. And then, the South Atlantic anomaly. A place where ships and their secrets can vanish without a trace. The fragile bubble of elation burst, pricked by a new, terrifying reality. Julian Vance, even on the run, was still a puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows. The Leviathan was no longer just a prison. It was a vessel hurtling towards oblivion, and Clara Beaumont was trapped in its inexorable, desperate final voyage. The hours that unspooled following the chilling revelation of the Leviathan's new heading were a crucible of unbearable tension. The Westport PD's Cybercrimes Unit, now a makeshift international command center, buzzed with a frantic, controlled energy. Detective Valerius, a man transformed by adrenaline and righteous fury, barked orders into multiple communication lines, coordinating a desperate multi-agency pursuit across thousands of nautical miles. The Coast Guard, Naval Intelligence, even Interpol, were now involved in the high-stakes race to intercept Vance's ghost ship before it could slip into the remote, lawless waters of the South Atlantic, a veritable graveyard of maritime mysteries. The Beaumont family, gathered in a small adjoining conference room, existed in a state of suspended torment. The image of Clara, oblivious to the life-or-death drama unfolding around her, was seared into their collective consciousness. Arthur, his frail body racked with tremors, alternately prayed and cursed, his gaze fixed on the door as if expecting news at any second. Lily tended to him, her youthful face a mask of stoic resolve, though her eyes betrayed the terror coiling within. Olivia, her pragmatic shell shattered, paced relentlessly, a caged lioness, while Isabel sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Sam, matured years in a matter of hours, stayed close to Ethan, drawing a silent strength from his older brother's unwavering, if grim, focus. Ethan himself felt like a tautly wound spring, every nerve ending screaming. He replayed the grainy image of his mother in his mind, her resilience, her quiet defiance. She had survived 14 years of hell. She would survive this. He had to believe it. Anya Sharma, her face illuminated by the ghostly glow of her monitors, provided sporadic, terse updates. The Leviathan is pushing its engines to the limit. They know they're being hunted. They're running dark, no transponders, attempting to use storm fronts for cover. A pause. But we still have their GPS signature via Costa's app. Vance didn't have time to disable that particular backdoor. Then, a breakthrough. U.S. naval satellite has a positive ID, Anya cried out, her voice cutting through the tense silence. They've matched the Leviathan's thermal signature and profile. AP-8 Poseidon maritime surveillance aircraft is en route to establish visual and maintain contact. Coast Guard cutter Steadfast and a naval destroyer, the USS Halsey, are diverting at maximum speed to intercept. But it's still a long way, and the Leviathan is heading into a developing tropical depression. The weight became a physical entity, an oppressive weight pressing down on them. Hours crawled by, marked only by the changing shifts of personnel and the endless, bitter coffee. Ethan found himself staring out the window at the distant, indifferent ocean, imagining his mother out there, caught between her monstrous captors and the raging elements. Finally, just as the city lights of Westport began to blur into the gray pre-dawn, Valerius strode into the room, his face haggard but alight with a fierce, almost feral triumph. "They have her," he announced, his voice hoarse but ringing with authority. The Steadfast and the Halsey cornered the Leviathan just as it entered the storm's edge. Boarding teams are on deck. Resistance was significant, but swiftly neutralized. Vance's crew fought like cornered rats, but they were outmatched. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief, so profound it was almost a sound of pain, swept through the Beaumonts. Tears, held in check for so long, flowed freely. Arthur sagged in his wheelchair, his face buried in Lily's shoulder, his sobs shaking his frail frame. "Clara, is my wife? Is she safe?" he managed to choke out. "The teams are securing the vessel now," Valerius said, his voice softening. "All non-crew personnel are being brought to the Halsey's sickbay for immediate medical assessment. We should have specific word on Clara's condition shortly." He placed a firm, reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "They will likely airlift her, and any other rescued individuals, to the nearest secure military medical facility for comprehensive care and debriefing. It will take time, Ethan, but she's out of Vance's hands. She's free." Free. The word was a sunburst after a long, dark winter. After 14 years of a living nightmare, of gnawing uncertainty and corrosive grief, his mother was free. The subsequent hours were a whirlwind of logistics and emotion. Confirmation arrived. Clara Beaumont was among the rescued. She was suffering from severe malnutrition, dehydration, and the profound psychological trauma of her long ordeal, but her spirit, miraculously, was unbroken. She, along with several other individuals discovered in the Leviathan's hold, victims of Vance's human trafficking and forced labor operations, were being airlifted to a secure naval hospital on the East Coast. Arrangements were hastily made for the Beaumont family to fly out. As they prepared for the journey, Ethan stood for a moment by the window, watching the sun finally break through the Oakhaven morning mist, its golden rays glinting on the restless sea. The antique cameo brooch, now a precious talisman, felt warm in his pocket. It was no longer just a memento of a lost mother, but a symbol of her incredible courage, her unbreakable will to survive, her desperate, enduring love that had reached out across time and distance. His siblings gathered around him, their faces transformed, the haunted shadows that had clung to them for so long beginning to recede. Olivia, her voice thick with unshed tears, gripped his arm. "You never gave up, Ethan. Not for a moment. I am so sorry I ever doubted her. Or you." Isabel nodded, a fragile smile touching her lips. "She was always with us, in her own way." Sam, no longer a boy but a young man forged in the crucible of this ordeal, looked at Ethan with an admiration that needed no words. Arthur, his face streaked with tears but his eyes shining with a renewed light, was wheeled forward by Lily. He reached for Ethan's hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Your mother, she is a lioness. And you, my son, you are her cub." Ethan knew the path ahead would be arduous. Clara would need intensive care, immense patience, and a universe of love to heal the deep wounds inflicted upon her body and soul. The family, too, would need to find a new equilibrium to learn how to be whole again after so many years of fragmentation. Julian Vance, though his Leviathan was sunk and his network shattered, remained a fugitive, a lingering threat in the shadows, though Valerius assured them the net was closing. Milo Costa and his brutal cohorts would face the full force of international law. But as they stepped out of the precinct and into the bright, cleansing Oakhaven morning, the salty air no longer carried the chill of loss, but the invigorating promise of reunion. The tide, which had stolen Clara Beaumont away 14 years ago, was finally, irrevocably, bringing her home. The race against the tide had been won, not just by ships and satellites, but by the unwavering tenacity of a son's love, and the indomitable spirit of a mother who had refused to let the darkness extinguish her light. Ethan looked towards the eastern horizon, towards the promise of seeing his mother again, and for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, a genuine, unburdened smile touched his lips.